Cool. All right. Well, over to you. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. It might help if you made me co-host in case I need to do anything from a hosty perspective.
Sure. Asking me to do something technical. This is never.
I can walk you through it if you don't know how.
Hold on. Make host. There you go. You
Perfect.
are now host.
Yep, great. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And this
You might have to press record on your end now, Jessica.
It appears to still be recording.
Awesome.
Great. Okay, great. So thanks everyone for joining me from all the way around the world. We are in, I just finished dinner time here, and I think you are all maybe in just finished breakfast time there, right? So thank you for joining me on your early morning. It's always interesting to find overlaps in the time zones when we're this far away from one another. We're going to be talking about assertive communication. My goal for you is for you to have some sort of a assessment of where you stand and some tools to come out of this with to either tone it down or to tone it up, depending on which side you're coming from. Because we're after assertiveness here as opposed to passiveness or aggressiveness. So I'm going to give you this Slido link, and we'll be using this to take some inboard surveys as we go along. This will help me get to know you and for you to sort of communicate to one another. And for anybody who watches this video after the fact, this link will not work for you, so don't click it. Other things to know there. All right, that link will come up again, so don't worry if you haven't caught it yet. I'm going to tell you first a bit of my story. So what you're seeing here are some images that are conjured by my initial approach to the world. These are definitely stereotypes, and they're based on the impact I've had or the perspective others have held of me. They're definitely not the full picture. I've just never been one to hold my tongue. I question everything, especially authority. I tend to attack problems and create opportunities and chart my own path. That means I come out really strong. In my 20s, that meant early in my career, I spoke my mind and got things done, no matter what other people's perspectives were. But I didn't really know what impact I was having on people. And I kept getting things like this in my reviews, or sometimes even to my face. I've been called a pit bull or a bulldog, unpolitical, brash, brazen, opinionated, intimidating, which I always wonder, was I really intimidating or were they intimidated? Who owns that mess of that feeling? I've been called arrogant and some other really not pleasant things, often stereotyping women who are that strong in the world. And I've seen people take that big sigh of, here we go again. Oh no, here she goes again. I have to listen to another thing she's saying. I had a dear friend in my early 20s who I have a dear friend now in my early 20s. She did not care for me very much because I would just ask questions. We'd be at a party, somebody would be talking about something going on, and I would notice the chink in the story, like the hole in the story that didn't make sense to me, and I would pick at it and ask inappropriate questions for the time and place that we were in. It came from a place of care. I wanted to understand those people better. I wanted to get things done. I wanted to communicate authentically and forwardly. But it never came off that way. That's a pretty hard impact to have on other people. So, over the last 20 years, I've been working really hard to rein this message in and to come off as not as a safe space to have a conversation instead of an aggressive and uncomfortable place to be part of. That's my story. But that's not the only story we'll be talking about today. We're also going to talk about the other side of the story. These are the stereotypes of the opposite side of the coin. The people that are seen as a doormat or a scaredy cat or quiet as a mouse. This is a really common archetype for the more passive side of the world. Now, while I, as an aggressive communicator, want to be heard, people that tend to be on the passive side, according to those that I'm around, and as an extrovert, there's this lovely joke in my world, I'm just surrounded by introverts. I kind of collect them and then connect them when they need to know each other. That's my role in their life and their role in my life. And it also gives all the introverts in my life a break from me, because it means I can go around from introvert to introvert. So I've talked to them about this, and really what's true for them on the passive side or the introverted side is they're trying not to take other people's space. That space doesn't belong to them by default. So they're leaving space for others. Sometimes it comes from an unwillingness to force their opinions on others, as in it's not my place. And sometimes it's a fear of social misstep, a social anxiety that goes on in that space. Any variety of things could be going on. Those seem to be the most common. I'm sure there's other reasons. And what I have found from all of those quiet, passive introverts is that they have a really deep well of wisdom because they sit and watch people a lot. People like me, we don't spend a lot of time watching. And people that sit on the passive side spend a lot of time watching. And they have become some of my greatest sounding boards and let's call it aggressive communication police. Right? They can help me sort of rein that message back in when I need it. None of these are really, neither of these sides though are really effective when you're trying to get things done together. So when we talk about communication, communication is really a negotiation. It's a negotiation between two people's needs. So on one side, we have the passive, the one that leaves more space for others' needs. And then on the other side, we have the aggressive, the one that takes space for their needs. When you have these two people in the same space or in the same relationship, by the way, this is my husband and I, so this is in my relationship a lot. When you have this in the same space or relationship, it often means that the person who's passive gets subverted frequently for the person who's aggressive. And over time, passive people tend to fester, and then you have a gigantic explosion, and the aggressive person is like, what just happened? Right, so that's a really common cycle that we've seen, and we see it all over, television shows and things like that. They repeat that frequently. Both of these forms of communication cause a break in trust and reduce psychological safety because the aggressive person is taking space away and not paying attention to where the passive person is. The passive person doesn't trust them to consider their needs. And meanwhile, the passive person, because they wait and then blow up, the aggressive person doesn't trust them to take their own space and to speak up when there's a crossover. What we're aiming after is this thing in the middle, this assertive space. Assertive is boldly self-assured and confident, often seen as firm but kind. And I don't know what it's like where you are in your part of the world, but I live in the south of the United States. And we have this phrase here in Tennessee that goes, bless your heart. That is the meanest, nicest thing you could say here, by the way. It doesn't really mean bless your heart. It really means you're kind of dumb or adult or an idiot, right? That's really what it means. But it sure sounds nice. We're not aiming for, when we talk about kindness, we're not aiming for shallow niceness. We're aiming for true kindness, which is about authentic relationship and connection that in the future will result in an improved relationship, as opposed to saying the nice thing now so we can avoid the hard conversation. We want to say the real thing now so that we can improve over time. All right, let me just pause here and see what people are thinking. Feel free to chat with me. Tell me what's on your mind and if you have any questions.
I just had a question. Jessica. Is it sometimes that you can move between these different bubbles and these different passive to aggressive, and depending on the environment or the person that you're surrounded by too?
Absolutely. One of the hardest things about, say, personality tests is they're always like, what are you more likely to do? And everybody I know who takes those goes, well, it depends. Am I at work or at home? Am I with my family who I adore? Or am I with that coworker who's always a jerk to me? And that will absolutely change the behavior that shows up. So it has to be an intentional, conscious choice. If you want to be passive and there's benefit for you in that, and you're okay with that, results of that, be passive. If you want to be aggressive and you're okay with the results of that, be aggressive. But we're trying to aim towards intentional assertiveness as opposed to letting our unintentional habits take over.
Hi, Jess. I'm curious about the dynamics of communication when you've perhaps got two styles that are similar? I see on this side you have like your needs aggressive and then others needs passive. Like what if there's two passive sides or there's two aggressive sides in the scenario, and what does that change about this diagram?
Well, the diagram doesn't necessarily change, but it just means that you have two people standing on the my needs space, which means there's a lot of competition if you're both aggressive. So if you're both aggressive, there's a lot of competing to be heard. The key thing to remember about folks that are aggressive is that that's really what they're trying for. They just want to be heard and seen. And if you can acknowledge what they've said, they'll often chill out. Not always, but often chill out. On the passive side, they're trying not to step on each other's toes. So if you have two passive people, you tend to have long threads where decisions don't get made, or there's an awkward silence when nobody knows who's supposed to speak next, right? That sort of thing will start to occur in those spaces. Sometimes when you have two passive folks, you get to comfortable silence, but that usually requires a little bit of work to know when you're there. But you absolutely can have that. And on teams, you often have some mix of all three of these things. And folks who are more naturally assertive tend to mediate between these two ends.
How about those that are passive aggressive?
So passive aggressive is interesting. Aggressive is I want my needs addressed. Passive aggressive means I want my needs addressed, but I want you to intuit that you're supposed to answer that. It's pretty miserable to deal with, as I'm sure we all know. I want you to read my mind is essentially the thought of the passive aggressive person. And there's this thing out there called ask culture and guess culture. Guess culture people tend to be more passive. They do this thing where they don't ask a question and they don't put forth their needs until they're pretty sure what the response is going to be. And ask culture people tend to be more aggressive or assertive. They figure, well, what's the harm? I'll just ask a question. Passive aggressive people have been trained that their guesses are wrong. And so they're really trying to get other people, and I say trained, socialized, grown to, educated by life. They're really trying to get other people to see what they see without having to say it, because it's not been safe for them to speak it.
Do you find that one personality type, maybe passive, tends to be more introspective in determining their kind of communication style? Do you find that aggressive people take longer to identify their communication style simply because of how they communicate and how they think?
It would be hard for me to say. It didn't take me long to figure out I needed to do the introspection. It also took me a while to decide to do it. Because knowing you need to and actually taking action on it are completely different options. And I know plenty of passive people, their response to, hey, I'd love it if you'd insert your ideas and your boundaries more frequently. Their response is, I shouldn't have to. And they don't make the change either. So, there's no change happens if the person doesn't want to make the change. And if they can say that, I hear that you want me to speak more, but I don't want to, and I'm not going to, then you can make new choices with that information. But that in and of itself is an assertion. I know you want me to get quiet, but I'm not gonna. I like it this way is a message. And then you have to make choices about whether you want to be in a dynamic with that person and how you navigate it. The trick is no one's obligated to change. They're perfectly welcome to stay where they are. All right, so let's take a look at where you all think you are. So you should see on that Slido that I sent you, you should now see a survey there. And you're rating yourself where 1 is passive and 10 is aggressive and 5 is the assertive zone. So where is your natural style?
Bit of introspection.
Looks like pretty close to everybody. A couple of you might still be finishing. That's fine. Looks like you all lean a little closer to passive than to assertive or aggressive, which is fine. Oh, we got some assertive either ends. This is a really common response, by the way. The 4 and the 6 tend to go real high. People are like, well, I don't want to say I'm assertive, but maybe I'm not all the way passive. And maybe I'm not all the way aggressive. In my 20s, I would have had to put 10, to be honest, about where I was. And I'm now probably a 6 or a 7. I have to really be intentional about it. It takes work to get to that middle zone. But this is an interesting thing. You lean a little to the left, just a teeny bit to the left in this group, which is something useful to know about your organization. That means there probably needs to be a little more intentional tending to boundaries and needs in your space. So let's talk about how we do that. Actually, let's talk about this. So each style has a way that they think and feel and a way that they speak and do. If we were going to talk about the passive person, what is likely, what kind of things would they say or actions would they take? Let's start there. And then we'll get into how we deal with this.
I'm sorry to have spoken for so long. That sounds like a passive thing to say.
All right.
Maybe something along the lines of like, oh, this is what I think, but what do you think?
Remaining quiet, just waiting for others.
Maybe starting like a question off by saying, oh, this might be silly or it might not be relevant before actually saying the question.
Yep, that's a fast way to undermine your own perspective, by the way. Things like taking the word just out of your emails can make a huge difference. I just wanted to check in. I wanted to check in. It was a perfectly fine statement to make. Okay, let's look at the think and feel side. What might they be thinking or feeling that they're not saying or doing?
They're probably thinking of their opinions and what they would want to say, but they're remaining quiet. Depending on how long they've been passive, like you said, the things might be building up and they might be ready to explode as well.
Might be feeling extra frustrated. Something in their head might be like, man, will this guy ever shut up? Right? That might be a thing they're thinking on the inside. Guy or gal, whoever it is. Okay, let's take a look at our aggressive person. What might they be saying or doing?
A lot of talking, giving their opinions without seeking the opinions of others or asking questions.
Yeah, not listening, I would say.
Could you say that one more time?
Sorry, not listening. Am I for you?
No,
So
I'm
We
good.
can hear you.
Not listening.
Ah, there you go. Not listening. Thank you.
It's the body language as well, the way they present themselves.
Okay, can you tell me more? What does their body language look like?
Sometimes you find it with the eye rolling or too much hand movements, or even the facial expression looking that they are not welcoming in a way, or they are impatient in a way. They are not patient. Come on, hurry up.
Yeah, come on, hurry up is a common aggressive stance. That's a common internal thought. They also have a tendency, I hear it animated, and they have a tendency to lean in a little more. I kind of caught myself doing it. Luckily, I'm on video, so you don't feel it in person. But they have a tendency to lean into the conversation physically. If it's somebody who's getting super animated, they might even loom, standing over. Right?
But
was
isn't
gonna
it
say-
leaning forward? Sorry, Rob.
No,
I'll
you go.
ask this very quick. But you mentioned the leaning forward. On the other hand as well, sometimes when you are leaning forward, you are showing the person that you are conversing with, that you are really interested, and you are giving them all of your attention though, right?
That's right. These signals that we send each other can be interpreted differently by the people that hear them. Aggressive people have a tendency to lean in more than passive people. Passive people like to leave room for folks, so they lean back instead of forward. But you're absolutely right. Interest could also be what we're communicating, and we don't really know unless we ask. So if we were guessing what's going on in the mind and heart, in the thinking and feeling sections of our aggressive person, what's true? What do we think is true?
I was going to say that aggressive people can also interrupt a lot and not let the person who's talking finish their thought, because they feel like, well, it is perceived that their opinion's more important, and so that the other person may not be taking their side or understanding their side, so they tend to keep interrupting and making the point again.
Be wary of assuming that an interrupter is being aggressive, though. If they come from a culture of collaborative interruption, like my background, half my family is Jewish. If you went to a dinner with that side of my family, there would be lots of conversations, several happening at one time. And as I was growing up, I could hold 3 conversations at once. And you would zip in and out of the conversations, and you would interrupt people because you got excited, and that was accepted behavior in that space. So when I was early in my career, unlearning collaborative interruption was tricky. Okay. So what might be going on in the mind and heart of our aggressive person?
Probably this feeling like they need to fight to be heard. So that if they want to be heard, they have to push that idea or something like that.
I would say that they don't think a lot. They just speak their mind as it comes, and maybe they're not actually reflecting on what they're saying, or yeah.
They might be out loud processors too. Like they need to speak it to hear it.
Yeah, exactly.
Which side of this, aggressive or or passive, do you think feels more anxiety?
Passive.
Both.
Okay. Both, yeah, they both feel anxiety. The passive person is anxious because what if I take somebody else's space away? The aggressive person is anxious because what if they don't hear me or they don't understand me? And that anxiety is riding in those communication styles. It's got the wheel. Right? So when we think about the assertive person, they're going to say things like, I have a perspective, and if I'm wrong, it's okay. Please let me know if I'm wrong. I'd like to hear your perspective, and then I'll take a turn. Those are the kinds of things an assertive person would do. Or they might say things like, I see your point. That's an interesting perspective. I also notice there's a risk in it. Could we talk about it? There's a lot of permission getting from an assertive person. There's a consent check that happens for assertive people. It's confident. They feel confident in their perspective, but they also want to make sure you feel confident in your perspective. They often do things like speak last, but they do speak. They will lift everybody else up. When somebody has a good idea, they'll say so. They'll appreciate people. They'll give gratitudes more frequently because they are confident in themselves. Giving a gratitude does no harm to them whatsoever and makes everybody feel better. A little endorphin push for everyone. So when you think about an assertive person, what they're feeling frequently is confidence. They're lacking anxiety. And what they're thinking is that everybody has an important perspective. All right. So how do we get past all this? So this model I'm about to show you for communicating assertively comes from Nonviolent Communications by Marshall Rosenberg. This is written by a doctor of psychology who lived in California in the United States and used this model to help inner city gang members stop killing each other. which is that says big things for this model, in my opinion. And it's really about hearing what's truly happening under the surface. So we start with when this thing happened. So when you raised your voice in an animated way, I felt a thing is what happens next. But let's talk more about that. Facts are free of judgment. So it has to be something you can obviously see. So I'm going to look at everybody's videos for a second. So I can obviously see that Mesa, am I saying your name right, has headphones on. Yeah. I can obviously see that Belen's got her hands up in her hair. Fine. I can obviously see that Angid, am I saying your name right, has got a cup. Great. And is drinking. Those are things we can obviously see. Anybody who is looking would have been able to reflect that. Yes, those are the things I saw. What I heard, these are the things I heard. And sometimes our memory can be tricky. You'll hear somebody say a sentence, your internal translator will tell you what that sentence meant, and you will not remember the exact words. You will remember the meaning. So you have to watch out for that one. But if it's written, it's great. I remember having a conversation with my husband once, and he said something and I got all like confused and irritated. And he's like, no, that's not what I said. And we were in a text message. I could scroll back up. And so I did. And I scrolled back up. I'm like, you're right. That is not what you said. And I corrected it. The nice thing about having it written is that you can actually verify the words that were used. The challenge with trying to repeat what somebody said back is it's often filtered through our own meaning-making machine. All right. So facts are completely honest things. Everybody could say that that was true. Then we say, I have a feeling. There's an emotion word that comes up next. And I've got some links for you on this. Bear with me just a second. I'm going to pull them up. I have them easily. There we go. All right, so they're coming in chat. If you have a hard time labeling your emotions, this is a resource that's free and available for everyone. The actual posters will be going up as merchandise on my website soon, but here's one of them, right? So that's the idea. So if you have a hard time identifying emotions, the emotion words that are on these wheels are all are emotion words that assume no judgment. So let's say somebody took an action and you were like, they're attacking me. That's the stuff going on in your head. You're not actually feeling attacked. You're feeling defensive because you assume they're attacking. So it might look more like, hey, when you did that thing, I felt defensive because the story in my head is that you're attacking my idea. When you said that sentence, I assumed that that was an attack against what I was doing. We don't know that they were attacking. So we have to be careful about which emotion words we even pick, because we feel defensive or we feel hurt, or maybe we feel nervous if what we're assuming is an attack on the other person's part. Right? So let's flip that script for a minute. When you sit quietly and don't share your perspectives, I feel concerned because I'm throwing out all of these ideas and I'm not sure if you're engaging with me or even interested in doing this work. Right? That might be something and a person with a slightly more aggressive stance would say to a passive person in an assertive way. The because is all that meaning that we make up in our brains. So our brains are meaning-making machines. We have a tendency to make up all kinds of stories about what's really happening. People will say things and we'll take it whichever way we go. It's always interesting for me doing talks like this in other countries because there's always this moment where you have to go, wait a minute, what does that little cliche mean? Because you didn't know what the colloquialism was. So those are some things to consider. But it often is because of a met or unmet need. Emotions are really important. They're like pain receptors for our brain. If you were to be walking, I do this all the time. I walk through the doorways and I miss the doorway a little bit and I stub my toe on the frame. I've broken toes that way. And my toe sends the signal through the nervous system up to my brain to say, hey, you hurt yourself. And I feel that I get the signal up in my brain, and my brain says, okay, well, we better take action. For me, that usually is sitting down and crying, but that's the thing that happens, right? I'm now in pain. I must do something about it to stop the pain. So our emotion is an internal thinking pain, or joy, because that happens in both ways. So it could be something like, when you crossed your arms in our meeting this morning, right after I gave my presentation, I felt a jolt of concern, right? Concern is the signal that your brain has just sent, because I was really looking for your approval. Approval could be the need I was having in that moment. And I don't translate arm crossed as approval. And now you have a new conversation. That met or unmet need is really critical. In the link that I gave you, the left-hand side is the list of needs that we all have. There's the sort of basic ones: food, water, shelter, but there's a ton more needs on there than we give ourselves credit for. We are a community-oriented biological species. We really need each other to survive. And many of those needs are about that: connection, contact, belonging, those sorts of things. And that's what our emotions are telling us. Either we got our need met or we didn't. So you can also use this for assertively giving gratitude. Hey, when you asked questions during that last series of question asking that we did, when we had, I felt encouraged, because I believe that means that you all are engaged. Thank you so much. That's a positive reinforcement feedback. It doesn't always have to be about the hard stuff. It can also be about the awesome stuff. So once you get that piece out of the way, then you can move. Oh, and this is another tip. And I don't know if this actually works where you are, but this is how it works here. If you express your feelings starting with I feel that, or I feel like, you are actually expressing the stuff that comes after the because. I feel like you were trying to get me to blah, 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 blah. Now I've gone into my story and not my actual emotion. So watch out for I feel like or I feel that. That's really about the story and not the feeling. Okay. The next place is to then turn this into a request if a request is warranted. So requests have to have 3 parts: clear, concise, positive action. Would you, not would you stop or don't. Would you is what we're after. They're immediately actionable. It's something somebody can do right away. And they can be answered with a no, a yes, or a counter offer. And I've recently been adding a 4th one of, can I answer this later? Right? Can we come back to this? That gives people who need time to think, time to think. Now, if you are in a position of power, you have a hierarchical power position over somebody else in your organization, you need to tell them they have permission to say no. Right? If your boss comes in and says, I need you to do this work, you're unlikely to say no unless they tell you you can. So it's important for them to tell you. It's important for you to tell them. So this also works if you don't have a direct hiring line, like you're not their direct manager, but you're in the same peer vein as their direct manager. You have more power in the system. If you happen to be coaching or seen as a leader in the organization, you will also have a power position in the organization. So just be wary that power is a tricksome little beast, and you will think you don't have it when other people will. Okay. There are 2 kinds of requests. One is an inquiry to get more information. This is essentially the kind we want to use to validate or invalidate the stuff we made up in our brain. And an action, which is to get something done, to do something different. So let's play one of those out. Let's say your boss did come in and said, hey, let me give you the whole scenario. It's Friday. You are planning to leave at 4:30 today. You have dinner reservations. You want to get home, clean up, and get changed to go out. And at 4 o'clock, your boss knew about that. And at 4 o'clock, your boss sends you an email and says, hey, I need this piece of work done. That's all they've said. I need this piece of work done. In your brain, what stories might you make up about that?
Boss wants me to work overtime.
Boss wants me to work overtime. Okay.
My boss doesn't care about my personal life just wants me to work.
Okay. Okay, did anybody go, man, what a jerk? Right, that might also be a thought that runs through our head. Okay. Right, they knew I was going out tonight. What are they thinking? Right, those are some things that pop up in our head. Those thoughts are courtesy of your meaning making machine, and they have nothing to do with what just happened. It might be that your boss popped you an email in the middle of another meeting, quick, while they were trying to make sure something didn't get missed in that meeting, and they gave you no boundaries for that request. So one thing you can do is send an email back that says, hey, I noticed you asked for this at 4 o'clock on a Friday, and I wanted to remind you that I was planning to leave at 4:30 today. I feel concerned because I had different plans and I'm not sure that you remembered. Would you be willing to tell me what the parameters of your expectations are, or what your expectations are, however that sounds better in your own language? I have a little scientist in my house, so everything's parameters here. So then you can make that request, and the boss then has an opportunity to say back to you, oh yeah, I don't need this till Monday. Well, problem solved. Great. I'll get to it Monday, no problem. And now you can move on without that frustration. Often
But do
what
you
happens,
need sorry,
Go
can
ahead.
I ask, so with a situation like this, do you even go to the extent of talking or emailing back what you feel about it and what's the expectations? Wouldn't you even in the beginning try to get more information because you know that you didn't get any information with that email? Would you first seek details before you share your concerns and remind them about your plan and so on?
So let's take a look back at your boss's email. Hey, would you get this done? Would you get this piece of work done for me? If they had given you all of their internal thinking, here's what led me to this, here's what my parameters are, here's what my expectations are before they made the request, you wouldn't have even needed to email them. So you're essentially doing the same thing. You're giving them all of your expectations and your context and the information that they need to be able to respond in an informed way to your request. This is about informed consent. Nobody can answer your questions or accept the things you ask of them without knowing all the information. And so you need to get all the information out of your brain into their brain. The other thing to know is that by virtue of being a community species, we have developed a neurosympathetic nervous system. And when we tell people how we feel, they feel it. And people don't like to feel bad things. So if you're concerned and then they feel concerned, they don't want to feel that. Now they're driven to change it. And that's just a byproduct of being the human species.
In that example you gave just then, they didn't give a time frame, right?
Yeah, they gave nothing. They said, hey, I need this piece of work done.
So why couldn't you just go back and, yes, sweet, I'll get it back to you. I'll get it to you next week.
You could do that too. But if you really want to move to assertiveness, you start talking about the internal language. Your boss is going to keep doing that until you tell them the impact it has on you. The brave new world of vulnerability is what we're proposing here.
I'm just trying to send the expectation. There was no expectation to get it done at work hours from that email, right? So I'm just
It could be, sure, it could be a different message. Hey, based on your email, I'm not sure. I'm confused instead of concerned. I'm confused. What are your expectations? You can do it that way. Just because I said concern doesn't mean that's necessarily the emotion you feel. You would pick your own language to go in that, right? There's a lot of emotions on that emotion wheel, as you may have noticed. Okay, cool. So the hardest part really is separating those facts from opinions. Has anybody seen this movie, Inside Out? Okay, I've got a couple of head shakes. I'm gonna do my very best not to destroy any of the plot. I highly recommend you go see it. So this character in the green dress with the blue hair, that is Joy. She is the emotion of joy inside a little girl's head. And this little character on the right is an imaginary friend. They are currently on the train of thought, and they have knocked 2 boxes over. One is labeled opinions, can't quite see it here. One is labeled opinions, and the other one is labeled facts. And Joy goes, oh no, these facts and opinions look so familiar. And the imaginary friend goes, don't worry about it. It happens all the time. We mix our facts and opinions up all the time because they feel like facts to us. So would anyone looking at the situation see or hear the same thing? That's one question you can ask when you're reflecting on what the facts are. And then what is the evidence that led me to believe this is the other question you're looking for. Now, this should map really nicely to Agile. We do this with our discovery, right? We go out into product world and we look at what the customers are doing and we watch how they're taking action with our products and we go, okay, what made them take that action? I think it might be this. How do I know? I'll go ask them, right? So when we're not sure if our evidence is presenting the meaning that we made up, that's the place to ask for inquiry. Hey, I noticed that you've been coming late to stand up every day this week, and I'm worried about you. Is everything okay? Right? That's an inquiry question. Is everything okay? And it's coming from a place of worry and concern instead of irritation, which can be the case in that one. And there's ways to do that if you're irritated too. Like maybe you've had this conversation several times, nothing's happening in the morning, they're just always late. And that could be a different conversation that you're having. But you want to start picking apart the assumptions you make about others. One of the assumptions passive folks make is that they don't want to take space away from one another, when in fact other people want to hear from them. And one of the assumptions aggressive people make is that they have to scream to be heard, when in fact people can hear them just fine. Okay. Consent does matter, and I alluded to this already. And what we're talking about here is informed consent, which means you have to tell people your motives. You have to ask permission first before you start telling people things and asking things. And give all the relevant information related to the situation at hand. And let people respond with no, yes, counteroffer, or an alternate time to follow up. There is a model for consent that comes from Planned Parenthood here in the United States. What I'm about to tell you is neither here nor there around my opinions around Planned Parenthood. They just have a really great acronym that I'm going to borrow for this conversation. And that is the FRIES acronym. So FRIES stands for freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. So consent only can be in place if all 5 of those things are in place. So freely given means I didn't feel pressured or coerced to accept whatever action was requested of me, or to even accept feedback. And this can be really tricky for leaders because you're like, but I hired them to do a job. That happens all the time, but I hired them to do a job. Well, are they doing the job? Yes. Is this an extra thing that wasn't part of their job description? Maybe they should be able to consent to that. Instead of you just assuming they'll do other duties as assigned, right? That's a tricky one in the job descriptions. It should be reversible. Let's say your boss sent that thing at 4 o'clock on the Friday and you looked into it a little bit and you're like, okay, I think I can get this done before I have to leave. And you get to 4:20 and you're like, oh, I can't get this done before I leave. Hey boss, can't do that for you today. I'll do it for you Monday. Right? That would be a reversible consent and a renegotiated agreement. Informed means they have to have all the relevant information. So if you request something of somebody else, they need to know everything that's necessary for them to get that job done. And you probably will not always make that mark because what they think they need and what you think they need are going to be different. It's like negotiating a user story. And then enthusiastic yeses. Now, enthusiastic in the workplace, I have never seen somebody go, yeah, let's do the work. I've not really seen that a whole lot. So what we're really looking for is a firm, confident yes. Yes, I commit to that work. That's what we're looking for in the space of enthusiastic. And then specific. So I need to know specifically what the expectations are and how we'll know we've met success. And that way I can meet your request. All right. What questions do you have around this concept?
All it makes sense. I don't really have a question. All it makes sense. It is remembering all of that. Always have it at the fore of your head when you have all of these conversations and communications, I guess.
I'm a firm believer that practice makes better. This isn't natural. We're often not raised to this style of communication, and it's not necessarily natural in our thinking. There's a lot of assumption we have between ourselves based on culture and anywhere from company culture to individual culture to, country culture. And those assumptions may get confronted as you start doing this work. And that can be hard. That can be really hard. The work is super valuable though. I've been working on it for 20 years. And I can only tell you that my connections have gotten deeper and better.
So do you think this action from a assertive person, how does that resonate with an aggressive and a passive person?
The informed consent side?
Yeah.
So as I'm going to go with fast thinker. So fast thinkers here, not necessarily aggressive or passive, but fast thinkers might feel like this is slow. They might get a little impatient for it. Slow thinkers are going to love this. The ability for them to say, okay, I've heard your request. I need to process it for like an hour. Can I come back to you in an hour? They're going to love this. Your aggressive folks or your fast thinking folks, which are often one and the same, but not always, they're fast thinking folks. They're going to be like, okay, speed it up. Right. My husband is a slow thinker, not as slow as in slow of brain, but like slow processing. Right. He's intentional and thorough is really what he has. And I'm a fast thinker. And he likes to hear why I'm giving him information or asking a question before I do it. I don't care about why until the very end. What do you want me to do? Or what's the information you're giving me? Okay, now tell me why you did that. And so we come at communication exactly opposite. Super fun to figure out how to work around in a marriage. And so I have to just remember to give my reason first. Let me give that motive in advance of the conversation I'm about to share. And then I can do the rest.
How do you deal with that with people that you're not so familiar with from a, when you're talking to them, giving enough information to make sure they've got enough time to understand versus speeding up the people that, or you've got a mix of people then I suppose, or how do you manage that?
Yeah, you want to err towards the folks that are slower thinkers. That does mean you'll have to manage the fast thinkers in desire to interrupt and get you to speed up. And you can say something to them like this: I know that you're ready to move forward, but I'm not sure everyone is. Let me make sure everybody's got the information they need before we go on. Right. They'll usually simmer down at that point.
What happens? Sorry, just a question there still. What happens if consent isn't given? Like, what's the best way to handle that next step in the conversation? So to use your example of the manager, and they really need it done by 4:30 for whatever the reason is, and the person says, no, I'm going to dinner. How can that conversation progress so it's mutually beneficial for both parties?
Okay. So I'm going to pretend that I asked work of you and you said, no, I'm going to dinner. Here's what my next response would be. Oh, I completely forgot that you were going to dinner. Or, oh, thank you for letting me know. I don't actually need this until early next week. Would it be possible for you to finish it by Tuesday? And that becomes the new awareness. When someone says no, respect the no. That's really where we are. All right, so the other side of communication is listening, and that response is a listening response. Oh, I heard you. There was a thing going on for you I didn't know about or I'd forgotten about. So let me respond to that. So I need to listen without needing to respond. Now, this is active listening. That's the phrase we typically use for this. This is the place where while somebody's talking, you're not thinking about what you're going to say next. If you have a hard time with that, I recommend you listen as if you were going to repeat them word for word. So you really have to pay very close attention to what they're saying. You may or may not repeat them word for word. You may or may not paraphrase, but it will keep your brain off the train of this is what I want to say to that. Right. Another technique you can use is to take a note. You could say, hang on a second, I don't want to forget what you just said, and write it down. Okay, keep going. They will feel very listened to if you do that, by the way, and you may want to warn them in advance, you might, so that they know it's coming. Ask powerful and open-ended questions. This is a coaching technique in the Agile world. It starts with what or how. They are open-ended, very short, and non-leading. Starts with what and how, open-ended, very short, non-leading. So instead of, they don't start with why because of this. If you said, why did you do that? People are much more likely to get defensive. If you said, what got you to that conclusion? Completely different response. Right? Our brain is wired as why is a picking at the motives. And then reflect what you hear. This is the place where you can paraphrase or respond. I think what I heard you say is this. Do I have it right? Do I understand what you're saying? That statement there alone will simmer an aggressive person down very quickly. They really want to be heard. So if you repeat what you heard and they go, yeah, that is representative of what I said, they don't have the need to keep talking. They've been heard. And then accept their perspective as truth. You don't live in their skin. So if they've told you their truth, take their truth as their truth. In the session I did at Agile 2022, somebody said, but what if they're wrong? And I said, they're not. That is their truth. There's their truth, there's your truth, and you do not yet have shared truth. And what you're aiming for is a shared truth. If you did something to hurt somebody, own it. Just apologize. Apologize, try and understand how they got there, if they're willing to share it with you, and then ask, can we talk about how we avoid this in the future?
Once you get a little bit more accustomed to everything, and I'm assuming you've had this with your husband, and the why becomes a how, does it then become a bless your heart scenario?
Hopefully he's not blessing my heart. No, what he does is, wait, why are you telling me this? I go, oh, right, hang on. And I back up, because you get sloppy when you know somebody for a long time and you have a good rapport with them. It gets sloppier. And also when you're tired, it can get sloppy, things like that. So, we have a rapport that he's allowed to interrupt me if I'm going off on a tangent that he needs more context for, right? Because if I do all the context and then give him the why, he goes, okay, wait, that's why you're asking me this. Can you go back and repeat what you just said? And boy, that's exhausting. So, so him just saying, wait, why are we doing this? Will reset me. I, by the way, just sit through his why until I get to the how and the what. All right. So your responsibilities in communication. You have a responsibility to set the environment so that others feel safe to express themselves. You also have a responsibility to communicate your perspectives, feelings, needs, and thoughts so that others are aware. Sorry, I went one too many. Those are the responsibilities. If you don't tell people what's going on inside you, they cannot meet your needs. And if you don't pause long enough to hear other people's needs, you cannot meet their needs.
Jessica, I just had a question. How does this advice apply in an environment where the individual may not care to communicate properly? I think a lot of this hits home in an environment where there's trust and there's a mutual desire to communicate effectively. But what about environments where there's not that, I guess, that underpinning?
Yeah, so you want to watch out for abusive behavior, things like gaslighting or bullying that often can show up in a workplace, coercion, coercion by threat of job loss or threat of financial risk, like you might not get that promotion or that raise. Those are abusive behaviors, and you want to watch out for those. So if you're in a situation where an abusive behavior is happening and you've attempted to address it and they really aren't addressing it, my question to you is, do you want to be there? That's a big question to ask to a room full of people who work all in the same office. So, you all You all use that question however you like, but but that's the question to ask. If you're in a setting where somebody is doing that, you might be a conversation with human resources to talk about how to get to a less toxic environment. So that's the worst case. Often what you have though is people that just aren't introspective. And what you're doing is modeling right communication. So you're going to model the behavior and you're going to continue to model the behavior. The most exhausting part about this is once you are more informed and better skilled, you then have a responsibility to keep doing it, even if they don't. And that's a pretty tough line to walk. So, tread it carefully would be my advice there. Cool. All right. I'm going to just skip past this one because I know we're getting close on time. I think it will go away as soon as I move past. What we're after here is essentially psychological safety. And we've talked about several of these. Own your mistakes. If you make a mess, clean it up. Don't cry over the spilled milk. Go get the paper towel. That's the idea on that one. If you have messed up big, they are under no obligation to receive your correction. Okay, so if they don't want you to clean it up, you're going to have to get closure your own way. And if it's a big enough mistake, it could mean a loss of job. That is something that I have experienced in my career. I made a big mess and I was not permitted to clean it up. I cleaned it up in therapy. Okay. Frame your intent. What am I trying to do here? Right. Somebody offers you an idea at work and you see some risk. Hey, I want to talk to you about your idea. I think it's overall a good idea, but I see some risks in it. Would you be open to hearing that? That's that consent check again. We have done that in our household, and sometimes the answer is, I am, but not yet. I'm still excited about my baby. Tell me my baby's ugly later. Right? Give abundant gratitude. If things are super stressful, you need about 20 gratitudes for every hard conversation. So you need to slather gratitude on like Vegemite. That's what you all eat there, right? Vegemite. Slathered on like some Vegemite. Get curious. The opposite of judgment is curiosity. So the more curious you are, the more you come from in a place of, I don't know anything, let me get inside their head, the more likely it is to be well received. And when necessary, self-soothe. If you're really activated, ask for time to get your emotional self under control again. All right. So this one we will do. What are you going to try in your future communications? Great. We have some great things popping up here. I saw somebody say, ask for time if I need it. Here's my rule of thumb. If no one will die and the company won't fold, I can probably ask for time. And that can be a good sanity check for yourself. No one will die and the company won't fold. We can wait.
A previous manager I worked for, he used to tell me, to get that sense, he used to tell me, is it life and death situation? If the answer is no, then you can have time.
Yeah. Okay, great. One more typing. All right, so I am open to do some Q&A, but I know we're right at the top of the hour. So I want to make sure I respect all of your time. So if you have more questions, feel free to message me. This is how you can find me. And I'm happy to talk to you more about this.
Thanks, Jess. That was great.
Yes, thanks. Yes, that was awesome.
Thanks,
Jess.
Jess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.